Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Dune in June. This is a brand new BookTube event created by Sean D. Standfast, designed to read Frank Herbert's masterpiece Dune in the month of June. It's a big book in every sense of the word, but it is doable. Dune has 3 parts to it, plus appendices at the back. The first part is fairly long, second part is fairly long, third part is fairly long. They're all about 200 pages apiece, but that's doable in a week if you do nothing else. Of course, it's BookTube, so you've got 50 events to do. You won't be doing nothing else, but the first part of this book is simply called Dune. The novel's called Dune, but so is the first part. And in the first part, in this far future science fiction multi-system imperium, the House Atreides is ordered by the Emperor to move from their home planet of Caladan to the planet Arrakis, Dune, desert planet, which was previously held by the House Harkonnen, the Atreides' sworn enemy. So it's not a random pairing, it's not a random swap. It immediately makes Duke Leto Atreides assume that he's walking into a trap and act accordingly. He and his staff act accordingly. They send one of their foremost bravo warriors, Duncan Idaho, ahead to make overtures to the Fremen, the native people of Arrakis, who live out in the great deserts where the gigantic sandworms guard the spice melange, which can only be found on this world, and which is absolutely vital to the workings of all of civilization. They send Duncan Idaho out ahead of time. We haven't met him yet. And the Duke's foremost assistants, his War Master Gurney Halleck, and his Mentat, a human computer, Thufir Hawat, are busily assessing every aspect of this move, of the changeover, because they expect treachery from the Harkonnens. Thufir Hawat, as we've been told, we've seen in an earlier chapter, has been serving House Atreides for 3 generations. He is ruthless and efficient, we are told, but he's old. And he is overseeing the security end of the house moving from one planet to another. It brought along for the move, and we are now the scene has now shifted to the planet Dune, is Duke Leto's lady, Jessica, who is a member of the all-female sect, the Bene Gesserit, but she's not his wife. She's not his duchess. He has not married her, partly as a political ploy, because as long as he's not married, every great house in the Landsraad can assume that maybe they might marry off a daughter to him, and she would become a duchess. They're okay with him having mistresses, but he doesn't have a wife. So there's an advantage there, a card that might be played. Of course, Jessica and the Duke are in love with each other. So they're not ever going to play that card. At least we don't think so. We don't think the Duke would ever take a wife, no matter how many assurances he gave to Jessica that it wouldn't matter. We're not 100% sure of that, since his son does exactly that at the end of this book. But they're in love with each other, and Jessica has given him an heir, young Paul, 15-year-old Paul Atreides. Not what she was supposed to do, because although Jessica is loyal to and loves her Duke, she's also loyal to the Bene Gesserit, and they have plans of their own for all the great houses and all the minor houses. They are slowly shaping a breeding program of their own, subtly matching up lines and heirs and whatnots in order to produce a man who has the powers of a Bene Gesserit. The Kwisatz Haderach will be a man who has all the powers of a Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother. Massive amounts of spice, first of all, go into that transformation. But once it's done, Bene Gesserit Reverend Mothers are more than human. They have access to ancestral memories going back millennia. They have enhanced physical abilities. Most of the time, they gain a truth-saying ability as well, to know become a human lie detector. The Reverend Mother who examines Paul earlier in this book is actually the Emperor's truth-sayer. A very important thing, right? You would assume is a very important thing in a science fiction world that, keep in mind, has no telepathy. There is no telepathy in Frank Herbert's Dune, in Frank Herbert's future world, any of the Dune books. So having someone right next to you who can listen to every person who comes in for an audience and know whether or not they're telling the truth, that's a good step in the right direction for telepathy. But Jessica is not that. She is an adept of the Bene Gesserit, but she's not a Reverend Mother. And she, now that we are on Dune, she is, well, she's the Duke's secretary. She calls herself that in the chapter that we're reading today. These are not actual numbered chapters. Dune doesn't really have those, so we're just going to go, I guess we're going to do a Dune read-along. I wasn't planning on that, but BookTube hijacks your plans. So we're going to do a Dune read-along. A large part of it will coincide with Dune in June, and then we will, of course, go beyond that. Because I don't think we can get even the first part, just part one, Dune, done in June if we do a chapter a day. We'll just keep going until we're done with the book. And there's been about 3 dozen of you who have emailed me. My email is on every video. Feel free to email about anything. There are about 3 dozen of you so far who have said, I am so glad that we are doing a Dune read-along of all of the Dune books. I did not say that. I did not agree to that at all. Dune, sure. I guess we've sort of backed our way accidentally into a Dune read-along, sparked by in honor of Dune in June. But as we saw in an earlier chapter, Jessica she's the love of the Duke's life and the mother of his son, but she's also an employee of his. And in this chapter, she refers to herself as the Duke's secretary. She's good with business. She's Bene Gesserit trained in business. And good with household arrangement type things. She is, for instance, now that they are at their new keep in the city of Arakeen, she is apportioning rooms, figuring out who goes where and what things are going to be, where things are going to hang and whatnot, including the disposition of the family quarters. And when this chapter opens, we see her. She is wandering around the place. We saw her already in the last chapter. She was in the great hall of the new palace with packing boxes all around her, just looking at the odds and ends and wondering what's going where and whatnot. She briefly talks with her husband, and then meets the new housekeeper, the Shadout Mapes, who has been assessed by her husband, the Duke, and also cleared by Thufir Hawat, the Duke's Mentat assassin, the Duke's major guy in charge of security. She's been cleared by him to be a candidate for housekeeper, provided Jessica likes her. And what's the first thing we learn when she gets within 10 feet of Jessica? That she's carrying a knife. Which the Duke missed, and Thufir Hawat missed it. But so she gets 10 feet away from the mother to the heir. Turns out Jessica is able to save her own life. There is no combat. She's able to turn the whole situation, but it made me wonder. It makes you wonder when you're reading this. I read this when it first came out. I read this eons ago. I've read it so many times since then. I've lost track. And these things jump out at me. They always have. That Frank Herbert is estimating some of his own characters different than I think you can estimate them on the page yourself. And we're going to get another example of that in this chapter, because we're following the Lady Jessica now. Our focus is staying on her in the hallways and rooms of the palace at Arakeen. She goes to another room. Opens the door. We're told she sees empty bookcases. So I guess there are print and paper books in this future world. It's not just film books. We're told always that there are film books, whatever they are. But I guess if you have bookshelves, then you must have books as well. Maybe they're for decoration. They're empty now. I guess the Atreides packed books to bring with them on interstellar travel. But there is an occupant in the room, Dr. Yua. The epigraph for this chapter is just a short chant from yet another book by this mysterious Princess Irulan. A child's history of Muad'Dib that says that 1,000 deaths were not enough for Yua. And that dovetails with what we have learned in 6 or 7 different points so far in this book, which is that the Atreides are, in fact, walking into a trap. The Harkonnens are going to attack them, and they're going to be supplemented with legions of the Emperor's own death commandos, the Sardaukar, superior soldiers, that the Emperor absolutely should not be sending to help one house fight another house. He's only doing it because he wants to exterminate the Atreides. Secretly. He's doing it secretly because if the other houses learned that he can just pick them off one by one, they might band against him. We know this trap, and we also know, we've been told 6 or 7 times now, that there is a traitor. In addition to the trap, there's also a traitor. The House Atreides will be brought down from the inside, and the traitor is Dr. Yua. an imperially conditioned physician whose conditioning should make him immune to treachery. He should not be turnable. That's what Silk conditioning is known for. He's supposed to be, in other words, not only professionally trustworthy, but conditioned to be trustworthy. But he is not trustworthy. This is not a big reveal. I'm not spoiling anything. You're told right from the beginning that Dr. Yue is the traitor. And here, we've seen him briefly in a scene where he talks with young Paul. And in that scene, we learn something about him, which is that he doesn't want to be doing this. His wife, Wana, who is Bene Gesserit, has been captured by the Harkonnen. And we can infer that the Harkonnen have told him that if he does what they want, if he betrays his master, well, then he'll be reunited with his wife. Now, Dr. Yue is not a fool. He knows perfectly well that his wife is probably dead, but he can't be 100% sure unless he does this. He doesn't want to. As he says in this chapter, if only it were possible to hate these people, but I don't hate them. That's a reaction that everybody has to the Atreides. They like them. Despite themselves, they like them. We're going to see that. The planetologist who's in charge of the change, the overseer of the change, Liet Kynes, knows that he is going to betray these people, but all of a sudden, he likes them. All of a sudden, he can't help but like them. And the Fremen think the same way. But that's jumping the gun a bit. Here in this chapter, we just meet Dr. Yue. And we get the same notes all over again. Herbert takes us into the thoughts of all of his characters. So we know what Yue is thinking. And he loves House Atreides and is loyal to them. He's only going to betray them because he believes he has a higher calling. And in this chapter, we learn that it's stressed again that he's not a fool. He doesn't think that his wife is alive, or that the Harkonnen will ever return him to her. In this chapter, we hear one other detail, which is that he would like revenge on the Baron, on Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, who was in charge of his wife's abduction, we assume. He wants revenge on the Baron. How that's going to happen, we don't know. We're not told that in this chapter, but that's an element we hadn't heard. He's not just playing for the possible survival of his wife. He also wants vengeance. But he is just standing there looking out the window at the passing populace outside the force shields that guard the palace. And he and Jessica have a conversation. That is what this chapter is. It's these two characters having a conversation, in which he momentarily refers to her as Jessica rather than my lady, and is flabbergasted at that, but not really. It's a false faux pas on his part, so that when he recovers himself and says, "Oh my God, I'm sorry I called you by your name. I was wool gathering. I lost track of myself," that she will assume that any reticence or embarrassment on his part in the rest of the conversation is because of that, not because he's hiding a huge secret. And it appears to be true. Only at the end, the very last lines of the chapter, do we learn that that's not true, that Jessica was not completely deceived. But instead, they talk. They talk a little about lost innocence. They talk a little about Dune and how precious water is there. We spent a lot of time in Dr. Yue's thoughts, where he is worrying the whole time that he will give himself away. Jessica is not just anyone. She's Bene Gesserit trained. She is an extremely dangerous person to have a one-on-one conversation with if you have a deep secret. He manages to skirt just to the edge of doing that. He arouses a suspicion at one point and then allays it. He's mentioning the Harkonnen. He's referring to them at one point in their conversation. And she is brought up short and says to him that I've never heard anyone, even in my own family, even in the Atreides family, I've never heard anyone say the word Harkonnen with such hatred as I just heard in your voice. And Dr. Yue thinks, oh my God, I've accidentally given the game away. She's going to know that something's wrong here. And he starts to stammer out an explanation. I wonder if I can quickly find it. Let's see here. I should have marked it, but that's all right. Let's see. italics that marks the spot. Let's see. Yes, there we go. There we go. Well, the way you say Harkonnen, she said. Even my Duke's voice doesn't carry that weight of venom when he uses the hated name. I didn't know you had personal reasons to hate them. Wellington. His first name was Wellington. Great mother, he thought. I've aroused her suspicions. Now I must use every trick my Wana taught me. There's only one solution. Tell the truth as far as I can. So he has picked up some tricks from the Bene Gesserit themselves. So he's using their own tricks against one of them. He said, you didn't know my wife, my Wana. He shrugged, unable to speak past a sudden constriction in his throat. Then he drops off again. The words would not come out. He felt panic, closed his eyes tightly, experiencing the agony in his chest and little else until a hand touched his arm gently. Forgive me, Jessica said. I didn't mean to open an old wound. And she thought, those animals. His wife was Bene Gesserit. The signs are all over him. And it's obvious the Harkonnens killed her. Here's another poor victim bound to the Atreides by a carom of hate. I am sorry, he said. I am unable to talk about it. He opened his eyes, giving himself up to the internal awareness of grief. That, at least, was true. And that's pretty much the end of their conversation. There's one interesting little detail that isn't personal in their conversation, where Jessica is starting to ask questions about the bioecology of the planet Dune. She's wondering, she keeps seeing how precious water is, and she keeps wondering why. Why is water so precious? There's volcanic activity, obviously. There are ice caps. They might be small, but they do exist. Why is water so scarce in these middle latitudes? What happens if you drill for water in the plateaus and rocky spaces where the cities are? And she describes what happens, which is that no matter where you do it, no matter where you are, when you try to sink a well, water flows for a few minutes and then immediately stops. And in this chapter, she says something must be stopping the water. That's not a natural occurrence. If you strike water, you've struck a table of water. Why would it stop right away? And longtime readers of this series will know what is going on. They'll know something is indeed stopping the water on Dune. But aside from that Dune-related detail, that's basically it. They have a fairly awkward exchange. Dr. Ewer comes an inch away from simply admitting his plan. And again, in hindsight, I look at this and I say, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you admit that? You can't possibly think that your wife, who was Bene Gesserit and noble and good, would like what you're doing. You can't possibly think she would approve of it. So she would never have anything to do with you, even if she was alive and returned to you. And also, you yourself say she is almost certainly dead. And the living Atreides have a better chance of exacting the vengeance that you want from the Baron than dead Atreides do. But he doesn't. He comes close to it, but he doesn't. And Jessica eventually leaves the room. And that is the end of this chapter, which left me with yet another black mark in the book of Thufir Hawat. He clears a woman who brings a knife within 10 feet of his lord's lady. Now, you might say, she didn't have that knife when he interviewed her or whatnot, but his people aren't anywhere around when the Shadow Mapes moves close to Jessica. That is a gigantic lapse in security. It's huge lapse in security. Especially since, let's think about this for a minute, it's not just that the Shadow Mapes comes within 10 feet of the Lady Jessica when they have their discussion in the last chapter, and is bearing a knife when she does so. It's also that she comes a lot closer than 10 feet. She passes the Duke in the hallway. He has a shield belt on, but he doesn't have it activated. She's Fremen. She could easily have killed the Duke right then. How is she wandering around the halls of the Palace of Arrakeen with a knife? Is what I want to know. Is the ultimate question I want to ask. And then there are no explanations for that. The one explanation that I've heard floated to me over the decades that I've made this point is that we are told in the chapter that we've seen with the Harkonnens that they are going to sow suspicion between Thufir Hawat and the Lady Jessica. They're going to make Thufir Hawat think that she is a traitor. And that maybe, therefore, if he thinks that, he wouldn't mind if a knife got that close to her. But he would certainly mind if a knife got that close to the Duke. He just doesn't know. And neither do any of his operatives know. And I'm willing to let that, I've always been willing to let that slide. And let me get to this chapter. And you're reading it, and I think you're feeling a little sympathy for Dr. Hugh, and that epigram notwithstanding, I don't think you're thinking a million deaths. I think you're feeling a little sorry for him, despite the perfidy that he's going to enact. But the Lady Jessica, at the end of this chapter, guesses that he had a wife who was Bene Gesserit and that the Harkonnens must have killed her. She obviously doesn't know the whole story. She obviously doesn't know that the Harkonnen, that Ewa is not completely sure the Harkonnens killed her. He thinks she might still be alive. But she's Bene Gesserit, and she was taken by the Harkonnens, and she was the wife of the Doctor of the House Atreides. Jessica is intuiting this from signs. I don't know how you would tell. I don't know how the signs that you were with a Bene Gesserit would be all over you. But she's interpreting that only because she had the tip-off of the way he says the word Harkonnen. But what about Thufir Hawat? What about Thufir Hawat? Are you meaning to tell me that he does not know that his lord's doctor had a wife who was Bene Gesserit, just like his lord does, and that that wife was captured by the Harkonnens and might be dead? Or might not be dead? How on earth can Thufir Hawat not know this about Dr. Ewa? How can he possibly not know this, especially when the doctor seems willing almost to say it himself? How can Thufir Hawat's operatives not know this about the House Doctor, which unbelievably, completely compromises that doctor? You would never employ such a person. Imperial suit conditioning or not, you would never employ such a person thinking that there's any chance that the doctor's wife is alive and in the hands of the Harkonnen? How does Thufir Hawat not know this? About the man who not only on paper would be an excellent traitor to House Atreides, but is in fact a traitor to House Atreides. How does he not know this? When Thufir Hawat has talked with Dr. Ewa, which Thufir is in charge of House security, surely he would talk to Dr. Ewa a lot. When they've had conversations, Ewa has never said the word Harkonnen. Hawat can't put two and two together. He hasn't done a full background check on this guy and his loved ones who didn't go through suit conditioning. It's another drawback. It's another sign of the point that I've made a couple of times, which is that we're only seeing two mentats in Dune, and neither one of them are fully there. One, the Baron's mentat, is nuts, and the Duke's mentat is, I don't think, at the top of his game. I think he misses things. I think he misses a lot more than he catches. We're gonna end this chapter and move on to our next chapter. Starts. Are we gonna get the extremely prolific Princess Irulan? Are we gonna get her again? Yes, The Humanity of Muad'Dib is her next bestseller, and the next chapter is a gigantic failure on Thufir Hawat's part. So yet another failure. But we'll move on from there. This is not going to be just bashing the mentat. We'll have plenty of other things to talk about. So we'll move on to that next chapter next time as Dune in June continues. So I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.